After 40 days, the jury in the trial of Erin Patterson was ready to deliberate. But before that could happen, the Associate to Justice Christopher Beale held a box over his head. He shuffled some papers inside, pulled out two, and read what was on them to the court. What was on these papers were numbers.
Juror 105. Juror 106.
These were the numbers of the two jurors who would no longer be required. They handed in their court iPads and left. And with that, the jury of 7 men and 5 women retired to consider their verdicts, the fate of Erin Patterson in their hands. I'm Brooke Grebert-Craig, and this is The Mushroom Cook. It's the start of week 10 of Erin Patterson's murder trial, and once again, I'm joined by my colleague, court reporter Laura Placella.
And we're coming to our listeners from our new podcast studio. We had to shift Airbnbs, so we've set up in a new place here in Traralgon. So if we sound a little bit different, that's why.
It almost feels strange after 40 episodes to be in a new place, but here we are, and let's get started. So listeners would have heard at the start of the episode about the ballot process, where 14 jurors got cut to 12, but we'll speak more on that a bit later. First up today, Justice Beale continued his charge to the jury and returned to the topic of credit lies alleged by the prosecution. Last week, he explained to the jury that credit lies can only be used to assess an accused's credibility and cannot be used as evidence they committed the offences.
Our listeners may remember that Justice Beale said last week that there were 4 credit lies alleged by the prosecution. The first was Erin lying to police about being very, very helpful during the Department of Health investigation. And today he touched on the remaining 3. He said the prosecution also alleged that Erin lied about the reason she invited her guests to the lunch, lied about what she said at the lunch about ovarian cancer, and lied about planning to undergo gastric bypass surgery at the Enrich Clinic in Melbourne.
Justice Beale then moved on to how the jury can use the alleged credit lies if they find them to be lies. He said they can be used to determine whether the other things Erin said to other witnesses and during her testimony were true. He warned the jury not to reason that simply because a person is shown to have told lies, they must be guilty. After this, Justice Beale moved on to circumstantial or indirect evidence versus direct evidence. He said it was not safe in a criminal trial for a jury to engage in guesswork.
He returned to the analogy used by the prosecution in its closing address in relation to thinking about the evidence as puzzle pieces. But this was something that defence barrister Colin Mandy took some issue with in his own closing address. So before reiterating the analogy, he actually said it was at the risk of upsetting Mr. Mandy, which prompted some laughs around the courtroom. This is more of what he said. These are his words, but not his voice.
While one piece may not be very helpful by itself, when all the pieces are put together, the picture may become clear. However, when putting all the pieces together, you must take care not to jump to conclusions.
Justice Beale then reminded the jurors that they must be satisfied that the prosecution has proved its case beyond reasonable doubt. But he added that it was almost impossible to prove anything with absolute certainty, and that was not what the prosecution were being required to do.
A reasonable doubt is not an imaginary or fanciful doubt or an unrealistic possibility. You cannot be satisfied that the accused is guilty of an offence if you have a reasonable doubt about whether she is guilty of the offence.
Justice Beale then went on to speak about motive. He reminded the jury that the prosecution does not need to prove motive, only the elements of murder and attempted murder. But he added that did not mean a lack of evidence of motive is irrelevant. Here's what he said.
It is a relevant consideration which you must take into account in the accused's favour when weighing all the evidence in this case. Moreover, if you find the accused had good reasons not to kill or attempt to kill her lunch guests, in short, she had a motive not to commit the alleged offences, that is a significant consideration.
Justice Beale said to find Erin guilty of murder, her conduct must have been conscious, voluntary, and deliberate.
When running through the elements of murder, he started with consciousness and said that this element excluded the acts of an unconscious person, for example, someone who was sleepwalking. He then moved on to voluntariness. He said this excluded conduct where someone was not in control of their own actions. Turning to deliberateness, he said this element means that the accused's conduct cannot be an accident. It was at this point that he reminded the jury that the defence claim that this was the element that had not been satisfied. They say that Erin added the death cap mushrooms into the meal by accident.
Turning to the final element, which was intention, Justice Bill said the prosecution must prove beyond reasonable doubt that at the time Erin served up beef Wellingtons, she intended to kill her guests or cause them really serious injury.
The prosecution contends that you should infer from the evidence that Erin Patterson had the appropriate state of mind at the relevant time.
He reminded the jury that this was also an element that the defence says has not been satisfied. They say that Erin did not have an intention to kill, but rather she actually had a motive to keep these people in her life. Justice Bill explained that a person's intention can be inferred from what they said and what they did, as well as what they failed to say and failed to do. He told the jury that they can consider Erin's actions both before, at the time of, and after the lunch. But he said if they had any doubts, the benefit of those doubts must be given to the accused. I will note at this point, Brooke, that the jury was not instructed by Justice Beale to consider the alternate charge of manslaughter, meaning that in this case, they will only be able to return a guilty or not guilty verdict in relation to the charge of murder and attempted murder.
On that topic of attempted murder, Justice Beale said the alleged conduct must have been more than merely preparatory, immediately and not remotely connected with Ian Wilkinson's illness, and there must have been an intention to kill.
Justice Beale said it was not in dispute that Ian came very close to dying, and that Erin's conduct in serving him a poisoned beef Wellington was more than merely preparatory and not remotely connected to causing his illness. He added that for an attempted murder charge, the intention, unlike murder, is nothing less than an intention to kill. Intent to cause really serious injury is not enough, he explained.
Justice Beale then turned to summarising the issues in the case and the related evidence. He said the first issue related to whether Erin had good reasons to not kill her lunch guests.
In a similar fashion to what he did last week, Justice Beale took the jury back to the evidence. He reminded them of the Facebook messages Erin sent her online friends about her in-laws in December 2022. As I'm sure our listeners remember, these messages included the phrases, "This family, I swear to f***ing God," and "At least I know they're a lost cause." Turning to the prosecution argument, Justice Beale said that Crown Prosecutor Nanette Rogers argued that sometimes the internal motivations for murders are only known to the murderer themselves. Using her words, he told the jury, "You don't have to know why a person does something in order to know they did it." On the other hand, Justice Beale said the defence questioned why Erin would want to kill her in-laws, given they were her children's only grandparents. He said they also questioned why Erin would commit murder when she was in a good place at the time in July 2023 and would have surely known that suspicion would fall on her as the cook of the meal.
Justice Beale said the second issue related to Erin's tendency to forage for mushrooms, referring the jury to the directions he gave them on this topic last week. He then moved on to the third issue related to why Erin cooked individual beef Wellingtons. He reminded the jury that Erin said she used a best-selling Recipe Tin Eats cookbook that called for a beef Wellington log.
But he told the jury that Erin testified that she deviated from this recipe because she could not find a beef tenderloin or a log in her local area. Turning to the arguments, he said the prosecution claimed that Erin cooked individual beef Wellingtons because it was critical for her to maintain control over the meal and to make sure she did not consume a serve laced with death caps. He said the prosecution also questioned why she would deviate from a recipe she had never cooked before. He then flagged that the defence did not discuss this topic in its closing address.
Justice Beale then turned to the fourth issue related to whether Erin served the lunch on different coloured plates. He once again returned to Ian Wilkinson's evidence about the coloured plates, where Ian told the jury that the guests ate from larger grey plates while Erin herself ate from a smaller orange tan plate.
Justice Beale said the prosecution argued that Ian was a compelling and reliable witness who had no doubt about what he had seen. He said the prosecution also argued that Heather backed up Ian's claim when she told Simon that she remembered Erin serving the meal on different coloured plates. On the other hand, Justice Beale said that the defence argued that it would have been smarter for Erin, if she was planning to commit a murder, to mark the pastry of the non-poisonous beef Wellington before putting them all in the oven. Justice Beale added that the defence also said that on her evidence, Erin didn't own any grey plates, and also said she didn't own a matching set of plates.
Justice Beale then spoke about the fifth issue related to whether Erin allocated the plates.
He said the prosecution argued that she allocated her own plate by picking it up and carrying it to the table on Ian's evidence, but the defence argued that without being told, Gail and Heather picked up 2 plates each and carried them to the table, in accordance with Erin's testimony.
He said the sixth and final issue related to whether Erin engaged in incriminating conduct, referring the jury to the directions he gave them on this topic last week. Soon after, Justice Beale moved on to the final topic of his charge, the verdict. He told the jurors their decision must be unanimous. He said all 12 jurors must agree on each of the 4 separate charges that Erin is guilty or not guilty. Justice Beale then said the jury will be sequestered to a hotel.
While you are sequestered, locked up, you'll deliberate Mondays to Saturdays here at the court in the privacy of the jury room. You will not deliberate on Sundays, but you'll still be sequestered. You don't get to go home on Sundays, I'm sorry.
Justice Beale explained that once they reach their verdicts, they can push a buzzer in the jury room, and all the parties, including the prosecution and defence, will be notified to return to court.
It was then time for the ballot. As our listeners will remember, there were 15 jurors at the start of the trial, then one got dismissed. So 14 jurors came into court today, but that was cut to 12 because in trials only 12 jurors decide the fate of the accused. Before the 2 jurors were balloted off, Justice Beale thanked them. Here's what he said.
Can I say a very warm thank you to those 2 people who will be balloted off. I don't know if you'll feel relieved or frustrated, but be assured you have made an important contribution to the administration of justice through your service.
As our listeners heard at the top of the episode, the Associate to Justice Beale then rose to his feet with that box with everyone's number inside before he called out for juror number 105 and number 106. These were 2 male jurors. They stood up, made their way out of the jury box, handed in their jury iPads, and then they were escorted out of the courtroom. The remainder of the jurors then took an oath or an affirmation to not discuss the case with anyone else. It was at this point that they retired to consider their verdicts. So the ballot took place at 1 p.m. Justice Beale told the jury that they had lunch waiting for them in the jury room. After that, the wait really began. 2 hours went by, and by the time it got to 4 p.m, no verdict had been reached. The jury were brought back into the courtroom where Justice Beale wished them a pleasant break tonight after a long day. The jurors all brought their luggage to court today, and after Justice Beale bid them farewell, they would have been bussed to the local hotel where they're staying at and will spend the night together, but he gave them very strict instructions that they should not be deliberating or discussing the case while they're at the hotel. Those discussions are meant for the jury room. They will return to court tomorrow before 10:30 a.m. to recommence their deliberations.
So now it's really just a waiting game, isn't it, Laura?
It really is. We have no idea how long it will take this jury to reach their verdicts.
And while we wait, we will flag that we don't know when our next episode will be, so make sure you follow the show wherever you are listening to the podcast.